When did human beings first appear on Earth? Not when the first ape stood upright or the first tool was struck, but when a creature emerged that would recognize us as kin, able to think like us, speak like us, and leave a trail of culture that echoes today. Human beings will be used in two layers throughout this series: biologically, as Homo sapiens, anatomically modern humans, and behaviorally, as people showing the full modern package: symbolic thought, language, art, long-distance exchange, and cumulative technology. These layers do not start on the same day. Anatomy matures before behavior fully blooms. Evolution is a gradient, not a switch. Populations change across thousands of generations, in multiple regions, under shifting climates. Bones, genes, tools, and pigments all carry partial clues. The result is a time window, not a timestamp. Fossils attributed to early Homo sapiens in Africa cluster roughly between about 300,000 and 200,000 years ago, with mosaic features, mixes of modern and archaic traits. Skulls become higher and rounder, faces flatter, and chins and lighter brow ridges appear, but not in a single step. Evidence for fully modern behavior tightens later. Systematic use of pigments, personal ornaments, complex stone toolkits, bone and antler tools, hearth management, and long-distance movement of materials. These signals strengthen by roughly 100,000 to 50,000 years ago and diversify afterward. DNA clocks compare differences among living people and ancient relatives to estimate when our lineage diverged. Genetics rarely names an exact year, but consistently supports deep African origins for sapiens and multiple waves of later dispersal with limited interbreeding with other humans, such as Neanderthals and Denisovans. The rise of Homo from earlier hominins and the long prelude of tool use. The emergence of anatomically modern Homo sapiens in Africa. The flowering of behaviorally modern traits. The departures out of Africa, encounters and exchanges with other humans, and the peopling of the world. Dating layers, radiometric techniques, reading bones, morphology, decoding genes, ancient and modern DNA, and interpreting artifacts, technology, and symbols are cross-checked to narrow the appearance window and test new claims. New discoveries can push states earlier or later, but shifts are usually tens of thousands of years, not millions. Confident claims come from multiple lines of evidence agreeing, securely dated layers, diagnostic anatomy, and coherent cultural context. The short answer is a window. Anatomically modern humans emerged roughly 300 to 200,000 years ago in Africa, and behaviorally modern humans consolidate later. Next, section 2. The long prelude from Australopithecus to Homo, and why walking, hands, and fire set the stage for us. Before Homo sapiens, a chain of ancestors tested walking upright, shaping stone, and taming fire. This prelude does not answer when did we appear, but explains why our appearance became possible. Walking on 2 feet freed hands for carrying and tool use, improved long-distance travel, and changed how bodies dissipate heat. Pelvis, spine, foot arches, and the foramen magnum all shifted to support a head-up, endurance-oriented gait. Between roughly 4 and 2 million years ago, Australopithecus mixed tree-climbing traits with committed bipedalism. Brain size stayed modest, faces projected forward, and teeth were robust, yet locomotion was already recognizably human. Grips became more precise, thumbs stronger, and wrists more stable. Manipulation improved first. Later, brain expansion and planning caught up to exploit what hands could do. By about 2.6 million years ago, early Homo stone industries appear. Simple cores, flakes, and choppers that slice meat and crack bone. The moment stone carries intention, culture begins to store know-how outside the body. Around 2.4 to 1.8 million years ago, early Homo shows lighter faces, smaller teeth, and slightly larger brains. Bodies lengthen their legs and shorten their arms. better for distance walking and efficient foraging on open ground. Sharper flakes open carcasses and marrow. Collaboration reduced risk and increased returns. Food sharing encouraged longer childhoods and tighter social bonds, allowing skills to accumulate across generations. Control of fire, sporadic, early traces deepening later, extended daylight, softened foods, and raised caloric efficiency. Heat, light, and smoke protection changed sleep, safety, and social storytelling around hearths. Bigger brains are expensive. Changes in gut size, diet quality, and cooperative care help pay the metabolic bill, letting cognition expand without breaking the organism's energy budget. Early Homo overlapped with other hominins. Some specialized for heavy chewing, others for wandering far. Evolution experimented in parallel. Our line succeeded not by a single leap, but by accumulating compatible advantages. By the time our species' story begins, upright bodies, skilled hands, social sharing, stone traditions, and the glow of fire were already in place. Next, Section 3. Anatomically modern Homo sapiens in Africa. Dates, fossils, and what modern bones really look like. To ask when did humans first appear, start with bodies. When skeletons look like ours. Rounded brain cases, lighter brow ridges, flatter faces, and chins. Anatomy gives the earliest reliable window, even before fully modern behavior spread. Key traits cluster together: a tall, rounded cranial vault, reduced separated brow ridges, a retracted, flatter midface, a distinct chin on the mandible, and a lighter, more gracile overall build. No single feature is decisive. Diagnosis relies on the pattern. Current evidence places the emergence of anatomically modern Homo sapiens in Africa roughly between about 300,000 and 200,000 years ago. The earliest candidates show mosaics, modern faces paired with more elongated brain cases, signaling an extended transition rather than a sudden debut. Finds from Northwest, East, and Southern Africa suggest multiple populations exchanging genes and ideas across vast regions. Instead of one small garden of origin, think of connected habitats where modern traits accumulated and spread. Dating often yields minimum ages, at least this old, based on layers above a fossil or on materials heated or erupted around it. That's why ranges are broad, and why earlier discoveries can be revised when layers are redated. Evolution builds with existing parts. Early sapiens faces can look strikingly modern, while brain case shapes retain archaic proportions. Later, vaults round out. This mosaic pattern is expected when selection pressures vary across regions and time. Bones reach near modern form well before the richest signals of symbolic culture and complex technologies become common. In other words, bodies arrive first. The full suite of behaviors ramps up later and unevenly across Africa. Comparisons among living genomes and ancient DNA pointed deep African roots, with splits among ancestral populations beginning well before 200,000 years ago. Genetics can't date specific fossils, but it reinforces a long, structured African prehistory for our species. For the dating anchor, first appearance will mean the earliest securely dated fossils showing the diagnostic modern pattern. Later sections will track when behavior, ornamentation, pigments, complex toolkits spreads widely enough to call populations behaviorally modern. Anatomically modern humans emerge in Africa hundreds of millennia ago across interconnected populations with mosaic traits that coalesce over time. Next, Section 4. Behavioral modernity, when color, symbols, ornaments, long-distance exchange, and complex tools reveal minds that look unmistakably like ours.
Bones tell us when bodies became modern. Artifacts tell us when minds behaved like ours. This section follows the rise of symbolic materials, complex tools, exchange networks, and storytelling, the signatures of fully modern behavior. Look for persistent symbolism, pigments, beads, engravings, complex multi-step tools like composites and hafted points, and bone and antler implements. organized hearths and storage, wide diet breadth including fish and shellfish, and long-distance movement of materials that implies exchange and social ties. Evidence appears in pulses during the African Middle Stone Age. Deliberate ochre use, engraved pieces, shell beads, and carefully prepared stone cores. These are not one-off curiosities, but recurring practices hinting at shared meanings and teaching. Composite tools, stone tips glued to shafts with plant resins and binders, show planning depth, recipe knowledge, and division of steps. A single spear point represents materials gathered, processed, and assembled with intent. When stone types from far away appear in camps repeatedly, it signals mobility or exchange. Either way, information and goods flowed along stable routes, knitting groups together over landscapes that once isolated families. Hearths become places for heat-treating stone, cooking complex foods, and crafting adhesives. Evenings extend teaching time, and embers carry stories, narratives that bind identity and coordinate tomorrow's tasks. Beads and pigments act like portable messages, group identity, status, or life stage markers. Standardized ornament forms across sites suggest shared traditions, cultures stable enough to outlast individual lifetimes. Early innovations sometimes flash and fade. Over time, the gaps shorten. Symbolic, technological, and economic behaviors persist across generations and regions, indicating that communities learned not just to invent, but to reliably transmit. Evidence appears in pulses during the African Middle Stone Age. Deliberate ochre use, engraved pieces, shell beads, and carefully prepared stone cores. These are not one-off curiosities, but recurring practices hinting at shared meanings and teaching. Some models imagine a sudden revolution. Others see a staircase. The record fits thresholds crossed at different times in different places, whose overlaps eventually form the full modern package. By the time behavior stabilizes, people are living inside symbol-rich, collaborative worlds that look recognizably human. Next, Section 5. Out of Africa and across the Old World. Routes, timings, climate windows, and encounters with Neanderthals and Denisovans.
Anatomy and behavior matured in Africa, then our species began to spread. Movement out of Africa wasn't a single march, but repeated waves, some brief and fragile, others world-changing. Small groups reached the Levant during favorable climates well before the main dispersal. These early footholds likely vanished as environments swung colder or as resident populations reclaimed the land, leaving scant genetic legacy. A later wave, roughly within the last 70 to 50,000 years, expanded for good. Lower sea levels opened coastal corridors, greener intervals and deserts created stepping stone oases. Technology, planning, and social networks were strong enough to ride out lean stretches. A northern path crossed the Sinai into the Levant. A southern path crossed the Bab el-Mandeb Strait into Arabia, then followed shorelines rich in shellfish and plants. Both paths likely contributed at different times as climates pulsed. Coastal foraging offers predictable calories and easy travel along the margins. Lightweight watercraft and tidal knowledge can turn barriers into highways, moving families, tools, and stories faster than overland treks. Beyond Africa, our species met established cousins, Neanderthals in the west and Denisovan-like groups in the east. Encounters included exchange of genes and ideas as well as competition for the same game and shelter. A small share of DNA in many living people traces to these encounters. While our species became dominant, traces of others persist in immune responses, metabolism, and altitude adaptations, a record of ancient neighborhoods written in genes. Populations fanned out along southern Asia toward Australia, moved north into Eurasia, then into Europe. Later, descendants crossed the far northeast land bridge into the Americas during lower seas, filling new environments at surprising speed. Glacial pulses closed doors, warmer, wetter intervals opened them. Successful expansions align mobility with windows of grasslands, rivers, and coasts, turning climate volatility from threat into timing signal. Cumulative culture, planned toolkits, shared maps and speech, and social networks that buffered risk let groups bridge famine years, cross gaps, and keep knowledge intact. Mobility wasn't wandering, it was strategy. By the end of this dispersal, our species spanned Africa, Asia, and soon Australia and Europe, carrying regional styles and shared ancestry. Next, Section 6, Neanderthals and Us, similarities, differences, exchanges, and why only one lineage remains. When our species reached Eurasia, we did not arrive to emptiness. We met other humans, most famously the Neanderthals, who had weathered ice, hunted giants, and mastered stone long before we appeared. Their bodies were powerful and compact, tuned for cold, broad chests, strong limbs, and faces with projecting mid-faces and prominent brow ridges. Skulls tended to be long and low rather than tall and rounded. Chins were subtle. None of this made them less human. It marked different solutions to hard lives. They walked upright, made fire, organized camps and shelters, and crafted sophisticated stone tools. Evidence suggests care for injured group members and deliberate treatment of the dead. In many daily rhythms, they look strikingly like us. Brain volumes overlapped with or exceeded ours, but shaped differently. Toolkits were robust and effective for close-range hunting and processing. Our species tended to push composite tools, long-distance procurement, and wider networks more consistently, advantages that compound over generations. Contact meant more than competition. Genetic traces in many living people show interbreeding episodes as our lineages overlapped. These exchanges left heritable tweaks in immunity, metabolism, and adaptation, enduring signatures of shared neighborhoods. Extinction rarely has a single cause. Climate swings squeezed habitats. Small Neanderthal populations were vulnerable to downturns. Our species' broader trade webs and flexible diets buffered shocks. Even modest differences in network depth, birth spacing, and survival can tip the balance over millennia. The more ways knowledge is stored in tools, symbols, recipes, and shared stories, the harder it is to lose during bad years. Larger, more connected groups replace lost specialists faster and spread innovations before they fade. Direct violence is possible in frontier zones, but long co-occupation suggests a mix of avoidance, occasional alliance, and gradual replacement. When one population grows faster and occupies key foraging niches, others recede, even without constant fighting. Genes from Neanderthal ancestors still modulate immune responses and other traits in some populations. Their presence in our DNA is not a footnote. It is a reminder that human was plural for a very long time. Differences in skull shape or rib cages matter less than the shared core: cooperative hunting, teaching, caring, and planning. Humanity is a spectrum of strategies for surviving together. Our lineage's strategy simply scaled farther and faster. Our closest cousins were neighbors, teachers, mates, and ultimately a vanished branch that still whispers in our genomes. Next, Section 7, into Asia and the Pacific, Denisovans, island dwarfs, and the astonishing speed at which people reached Australia. As our species spread east, the map turned maritime. New cousins appeared in the gene record. Sea channels became gateways, and people crossed into lands no human had seen before. In Central and Eastern Asia, a sister lineage, known today mostly from DNA, left genetic traces in many living populations, especially in parts of Oceania and Southeast Asia. Their bones are scarce, but their legacy in our genomes is clear. Small percentages of Denisovan ancestry in modern groups point to multiple encounters at different times and places. Some inherited genes aided high-altitude life and immune defenses, showing that interbreeding sometimes delivered useful adaptations. Across Southeast Asia, hominin history was crowded. Island dwarf species, long isolated groups, and new arrivals overlapped in time. Each island imposed its own rules, limited resources, unique fauna, and sea channels that turned short distances into cultural boundaries. Shorelines offered predictable food and a linear path. As sea levels rose and fell, sandbars, islets, and headlands stitched into stepping stones. People tracked tides, seasons, and winds, turning edgelands into highways of movement and exchange. Lower seas joined Australia, New Guinea, and Tasmania into the supercontinent of Sahul, but deep channels still demanded deliberate sea crossings. Reaching Sahul marked some of the earliest successful open-water voyages in human history. Archaeology and genetics together place the initial peopling of Sahul deep in the late Pleistocene. Exact dates vary by site and method, but the pattern is consistent: rapid arrival after coastal dispersal through Southeast Asia, followed by swift spread across vast new landscapes. Once ashore, groups reached deserts, mountains, and coasts with surprising pace. Water knowledge, fire use, and social mapping let people leap from river to river and dune to dune, leaving early campfires, tool scatters, and ochre traces behind. Sea travel requires shared procedures: boat building, landing choices, cargo packing, and storm rules. These habits are culture encoded, taught with words and stories, evidence of planning horizons that stretch beyond any single journey. After the first crossings, rising seas reshaped coasts and stranded sites beneath continental shelves. Oral histories, rock art, and inland sites preserved glimpses of lifeways whose shore camps now lie underwater. Eastward expansion knit our species to Denisovans, birthed seafaring traditions, and carried people into Sahul's deep time. Next, Section 8. Into Europe, meeting Neanderthals at scale, climate whiplash, art caves, and how regional styles flourished and faded.
As our species pushed into Europe, the stage was crowded with Neanderthals in volatile climates. Overlapping occupations, cold snaps, and rapid innovations produced a tapestry of cultures that rose and faded in quick succession. Small waves of Homo sapiens appear sporadically before the main expansion, leaving hints that don't always persist. Later, larger populations establish continuous presence, with toolkits and ornaments spreading across mallees and coasts. Danskar Ushker warmings and Heinrich chills repeatedly flipped habitats. Groups learned to pivot, shifting prey, camps, and routes, turning flexibility into a survival skill as forests opened to step and back again. One of the first continent-wide cultural packages appears: blade-based stone tools, bone and antler points, personal ornaments, and early figurative art. Its spread suggests strong teaching networks and shared ideas traveling far. Cave walls bloom with animals, hand stencils, and signs. Portable art includes ivory figures and engraved plaques. These images aren't decoration alone. They map memories, rituals, and identities in shared symbolic space. For centuries, Sapiens and Neanderthals overlap in regions like Iberia and the Balkans. Exchange, avoidance, and competition all likely occur. As climates shift and networks densify, Sapiens populations expand and persist. After the first waves, Europe fragments into cultural provinces with distinct tools, ornaments, and art habits. These styles track rivers, mountains, and social ties, showing that innovation was local as well as shared. Big game on open steppe demanded coordinated drives, tailored projectiles, clothing and shelter suited to wind and ice. Winter calendars, stored fuel, and caching strategies reveal planning that spans seasons, not days. Formal burials with goods, layered ornaments, and pigment use point to roles, kinship, and story-rich rites of passage. As signal systems grow, strangers can recognize allies at a glance, a social technology that scales. Europe's record shows art, adaptation, and the fading of other human lineages as our networks consolidated. Next, Section 9, into the Americas, land bridges, coastal corridors, and how people filled a hemisphere from ice margins to tropical forests.
The last great expansion carried people across the far northeast, then south through corridors of ice and along rich Pacific shores, filling 2 continents from tundra to rainforest in a geological blink. During low seas, Siberia and Alaska connected by broad steppe tundra. Families could live there for generations, building cold-weathered toolkits and coastal skills before moving farther south when ice and climate allowed. Pacific coastal route, small boats and shore foraging followed a kelp highway of fish, shellfish, and seaweed, skirting glaciers and hopping refuges. Interior route, an ice-free corridor opened later between continental ice sheets, enabling overland movement once plants and animals recolonized. Archaeology now points to peoples south of the ice by earlier than once thought dates in several regions. Later, distinctive Clovis toolkits spread rapidly, reflecting robust hunting strategies on newly opened plains and parklands. Within a few thousand years, camps, quarries, and hearths appear from Arctic rivers to the southern cone. Mobility, knowledge of seasonal resources, and social ties let groups leap basin to basin at surprising speed. Deglaciation raised seas, drowned old coasts, and shifted migration fronts inland. Many early shoreline camps now lie underwater, so the surviving record is a partial map of a much busier story. As climates warmed and giant mammals dwindled, people diversified diets: small game, fish, roots, seeds, and coastal harvests. Flexible subsistence buffered communities against rapid ecological change. Distinctive points, scrapers, and milling stones mark regional traditions. Tool forms track prey, rock sources, and teaching lineages, evidence of thriving local cultures linked by long paths of exchange. Ornaments, pigments, and shared napping styles imply alliances across distance. In lean years, knowledge and resources could travel farther than families, keeping techniques alive until conditions improved. Peopling wasn't one crossing, but a long, climate-paced process, scouting, settling, retreating, returning until routes stabilized and populations took root across coasts, plains, forests, and highlands. By the time seas rose to modern shores, the Americas held a mosaic of lifeways tuned to ice, desert, mountain, and mangrove. Next, Section 10, the synthesis: when, where, and how human beings appeared, and why the answer is a window of emergence, not a single birthday.
The question sounds simple. The record says window. Bodies like ours arise earlier than cultures like ours, and dispersal unfolds in waves. To answer clearly, separate anatomy, behavior, and global presence. Anatomically modern humans, rounded brain cases, lighter brows, flatter faces, chins, gracile frames, emerge in Africa roughly hundreds of millennia ago. Early skulls mix old and new traits before the full pattern stabilizes. Anatomy gives the earliest credible first appearance. Symbolic materials, pigments, beads, engravings, composite tools, managed fire, wide diets, and long-distance exchange ramp up later and unevenly. Behavior becomes reliably modern when these practices persist across generations and regions. After anatomy and behavior consolidate, people leave Africa in repeated pulses, meet and mingle with other humans, master coasts and cold, and fill Eurasia, Sahul, Europe, and the Americas. First appearance on Earth does not require everywhere at once. Evolution is population change across time, not a single birth. Different regions contribute different pieces at different moments. Climates open doors and close them. Small groups experiment, and only some lineages persist. Anatomically modern Homo sapiens, Africa, deep in the late Middle Pleistocene. Behaviorally modern humans, later consolidation, with pulses that become continuous. And global humans, after dispersal waves stabilize and populations take root on multiple continents. More than bones, teaching that stacks knowledge, symbols that travel beyond families, networks that buffer bad years, planning that reaches across seasons, stories that carry maps, morals, and methods. Neanderthals, Denisovans, island lineages, our history is plural. Exchanges left genetic and cultural traces that persist today, reminders that human was a community of kinds before it narrowed to one.
Redated layers, underwater coasts, and ancient DNA refine the window without overturning the arc. Expect adjustments in thousands to tens of thousands of years. Expect the outline, Africa first, then out, to hold. Human beings first appear as anatomy before 200,000 years ago, and likely earlier, as behavior consolidating later, and as a global species only after waves of dispersal. First is a horizon we approach from many angles, not a single dawn. Say it simply on screen: bodies early, minds assembled, worlds connected. That is when human beings first appeared, when anatomy, behavior, and networks together made lives we still recognize as our own.